The basement room that I fixed up a few months back has turned into the junk pile that I had feared. Well, a part of it, anyways. So, this corner of the basement shop, as we call it, is where we'd like to build some storage and think of it like our garage. It'll be all the kinds of things besides the car that you would put in a garage, like gardening tools and house fix it kind of tools. So what I want to make is a storage system that will be a structure with a bunch of drawers in that structure. We had thought that the entire wall would be drawers, but it made sense to make it a little smaller and have a more open space with French cleats, of course, to hold sort of bigger things and longer things like rakes and shovels and a crowbar. And then I can pretty it up a little bit with some trim. So I got a whole bunch of plywood. This is birch plywood. It comes in 60-inch square sheets, which I think is also 1.5 meters. So most of these are for the sides of the drawers. A couple of thinner sheets for the bottoms of the drawers. Now I'll start building the frame, and I decided to do it out of 2x material. The other way to do this would be to attach 3/4-inch plywood together and make these frames out of that. But I did it this way, as I was using so much plywood on this project already. I can cut the pieces to rough length, and I'll need 4 pieces for the bottom and top. Then I need the longer vertical pieces for the structure. Then I need 10 long pieces for the vertical sections of the structure, and a whole bunch of little short pieces to tie the vertical pieces together. Now once I have everything sort of to length, I can joint and plane all of the pieces. I know it's a little odd joining 2x4s. So I jointed one wide side and one narrow side. Then I could plane the opposite surfaces and get all of my pieces to be the same width in both directions. So I planed the shorter pieces and then the longer pieces. And this filled up about half my dustbin. Now to attach the pieces together, I got back the panorouter. I had one of these a few years ago, and it got taken back with the promise that I would get a new one, and that has finally happened. So now I have the new improved panorouter with adjustable table, and all the stops and sort of measuring parts and holding pieces are all improved now. Now the one that I got was mostly put together, so I didn't have to do a whole lot except take it out of the box and put the fence together, which was just 2 screws. Now, I could do all of the cuts that I'm going to make on this with the CNC machine. One advantage with the panorouter is it's really quick. Once everything's set up, you can put your part in place and cut it and move on to the next part really quickly. So the way this works is you put a pattern up on the vertical plane, and you can follow that pattern and cut that shape into something that you have held on the table. So the clamping system works really well, but to hold a long piece parallel to the table, you need to make some jigs that transfer the clamping force to your workpiece. And it's basically just an L-shaped jig. So I made a wide version of that and then cut it in half and got 2. So you can see you clamp the jig down and the jig holds the workpiece in place. So I need to cut a bunch of mortises into the vertical sections of the structure. And this is about the simplest operation you can do with the panorouter. So I can just set where I want each of the mortises and then cut that same mortise into the vertical piece of the structure multiple times. And there were a lot of these to do. I guess it's 5 vertical panels times 2 times 8. So 80 of these little mortises to do. My son asked why I couldn't just put all the 2x4s on the CNC bed and cut all the mortises at once. And I could totally do that, but it would be a lot of time setting up where all those mortises go exactly so that they fall centered on each 2x4 and centered on all of them all at once. It would just take a lot of measuring and a lot of testing. And you have one chance to screw them all up. So I went and checked them all to make sure my tenon was going to fit in my mortises. Now I can start cutting the cross pieces. I can take my short piece of 2x4 and cut it in half. This gives me twice as many pieces, the same amount of wood, sort of. Now I need to find the center. Now once I've set up the first one, I can put the fence in place. Then I don't have to find the center on all of them, just the first one. Now I can set it up to go around the little pattern on the panorouter and clamp the workpiece in place and set the depth. And once all of this is set up, I can just put each piece in place and cut. I used one of my roller stands for the vacuum hose. It was getting caught on the edge of the table. One thing that works a lot better now is the dust collection for the router. So now with all of the parts made, I can start gluing the vertical sections together. So I test fit everything. Then I can just put glue in the mortises and put everything together. I pushed one side in by hand. Then the other side I could just clamp into place, and that would push the mortise and tenons together. And I didn't worry too much about everything being square at this point. It just needs to be close. It's more that it needs to be flat and be a plane and not a warped plane. So I made 5 of these. I had left the vertical sections a little bit long, so I can get them lined up to where I think they should all be the same. Then cut off the end to square up the piece and to get them all to be the same length. So now I can treat this piece as a panel. So the first step was really getting the mortise and tenons right and getting the piece to be a flat plane. Now I can worry about the ends and the shape of the overall piece. Now what I need to do is cut a dado into the sides of these panels, and that will be what the drawer will slide in. There'll be a dado at each of the cross pieces. This is basically why the cross pieces are there, is to hold the dado, which then holds the drawer. I can cut the dados. And I did this where I would position the fence to do a dado, and I would do both sides of each panel and then put that panel back and get another panel out and cut the dado in the same spot with the fence in the same place. So in doing it this way, all the dados at each height are exactly the same. It meant that I had to move and transfer the panels around. The other way to do it would be to do each panel in full and move the fence for each dado, but then the dados wouldn't be as precise across all of the panels. So in doing it this way, it forces the precision to be where I want it to be, which is the heights of the dados across all of the panels so that the drawers are straight. I can start putting all the parts together into the structure. I can lay out the top and bottom pieces. I'd thought about putting dados into these, but I ended up with not quite enough height on my vertical pieces. So I can clamp together enough that I can then start to screw the pieces together. I started at one corner. Then I can start putting the different panels in, starting at one end. So I made sort of a story stick. It's 2 blocks of wood to go between the vertical pieces so that as I'm putting the vertical pieces together, they're all exactly the same distance apart. You can see how the blocking sticks that I made work. I can put those in place and then clamp that panel to the previous panel, and they're then exactly the same distance apart. Now I can work on the top, and it's basically the same thing. It's a little bit easier now because the vertical parts of the structure are in place. I do like to use screws in that I can take it apart if I need to. And it's letting me put this together in the shop, and I can build the drawers into it. Then take it all apart and move it into the house. So the structure is put together. Now I can check it and see if my drawers are going to work. And they seem to all be the same distance apart. And the middle and the top and the bottom seem to be the same. So they're not warped or bowed too badly. Now I can start cutting out the parts for the drawers. So I started with the bottoms. Now the way these drawers are going to work is the sides are going to sit on top of the bottom, and the bottom's going to stick out on the 2 sides of the drawers. That part of the bottom that sticks out will ride in that dado that I cut into the structure. So what I can do now to check all the drawer bottoms is to cut them out and put them into place. And as long as that works, I just have to make a 4-sided box to sit on top of all of those bottoms. I can start cutting out the drawer sides. I've got 2 drawer heights. I've got a 6-inch space on the top for 4 drawers and a 12-inch space on the bottom for 4 drawers. And I'm going to make the sides 4.5 inches tall and 10 inches tall. So I'll have a little bit of a gap between the drawers. That allowed me to get all of the drawers that I needed with the plywood that I had, and use up the plywood completely instead of having a little extra bit. So once I have the strips cut, I can cut them to length. The drawers are almost square, but I think they're a little bit deeper than they are wide. The fronts and backs were different than the sides, so I had to keep track of the 2 different heights and then the 2 different lengths. Now in the front and back, I want to cut a handle for the drawer. And the idea with these is that you can pull the drawer completely out and carry it around like a box. So I wanted a handle on the back as well. So I figured out a method and set up some stops to be able to cut all of these handles into the 64 fronts and backs that I had. Now here's my proud dad story. I showed Calvin how to do this once, and he did the next 30 perfectly without making a single mistake. He wasn't super excited about it, but he did a really good job. So he did the taller drawers, and then I did the shorter drawers the next day. Now I can cut out for the joint at the corner of the drawers. And this is the same joint I've been doing on drawers for a while now. So I can cut a dado in one side and a rabbet in the other side, and then put that corner together. And once everything's set up, it goes really quickly. The pieces to the drawers are done, and I can start putting the drawers together. Now I needed to make sure my handles were right on all of these. That was my fear. I was going to get it all glued up. One handle would be flipped wrong. So you can see how that joint goes together. And I can just put glue into the dado and put the corner together. Now the joint and the glue are going to do most of the strength. So I just use pin nails to hold it in place while the glue dries. Now once the sides are done, I want to put the bottom on. And the sides of the bottom are going to stick out. And I wanted them to stick out the same amount on each side. So I figured out what that width was, and I planed a little stick to be that width. And I could clamp that stick to the edge of the bottom. Then when I put that stick up against the drawer with the bottom in place, the bottom would be in the right place on the drawer slides. Then it's just a matter of gluing it in place. Now I've started with pin nails just to hold the bottom in place while the glue dries. And what I'd like to do is come back and put staples in as well to help hold the bottom on. Because while the drawer is sitting in the shelves, this is perfectly strong because the sides are sitting on the bottom. But when you're carrying the drawer around, then the bottom is having to hold itself on to the drawer sides. So it seems like it needs to be a little stronger than glue and pin nails. Now to do the pin nails and then eventually the staples, I need to know where the side of the drawer is, where the bottoms stick out. So I drew a line down the center of the drawer side so I could put the pin nails in. I didn't really want a nail or a staple coming through the outside of the drawer on the sides, as it would mean it wouldn't slide in the dado. But they all worked out okay. So at this point, I'm going to stop this video. And after that, I hope to then install this and the rest of the storage unit into the basement. And that will be a second video in the future. Thanks for watching.